Hello, and welcome to the Fear Channel, a channel with regular broadcasts telling the most chilling of urban legends, ghost stories, and forays into the darkest corners of the human mind. Those faint of heart, or prone to night terrors, should proceed at their own risk. Tonight's story is the abduction of Betty and Barney Hill. The Hills were a relatively ordinary couple. Aside from being an interracial couple during a time when a large portion of the population did not support their marriage, not much sets the Hills aside from your average family in early 1960s America. Barney, a 39-year-old black man, worked for the Postal Service, and Betty, a 41-year-old white woman, was a supervisor for the Child Welfare Department. Because of Barney's ulcer problems, the two had embarked on a vacation into Canada. On September 19, 1961, they began their journey back home. It was around 10 p.m. when Barney, who was driving, saw a star that seemed to move erratically. He pointed this out to Betty, and they both kept tabs on it as they drove along. They were just north of North Woodstock, when Barney noticed that the star was following their car. When they arrived at Indian Head, they stopped along the side of the road and got out to have a better look. Using binoculars, Barney zoomed in on what he thought was a star. He could make out different colors of lights. The next thing the Hills recalled was being frightened by the mysterious flying object. Barney scurried back to the car where Betty was waiting. They jumped into the car and raced down the highway. Looking for the object, they found that it was now gone. Although they had been driving only a couple of minutes, they were 35 miles down the road. Betty and Barney finally arrived home safely. They were tired from their journey and immediately went to bed. When Betty awoke the next day, she telephoned her sister Janet and told her about the strange object they had seen. Janet urged her to call Pease Air Force Base and tell them what her and Barney had seen. After hearing Betty's report, Major Paul W. Henderson told her that the UFO was also confirmed by their radar. The Hills took some comfort in the notion that they were not seeing things, and they were trying to put the incident behind them. But soon Betty began to have nightmares. In her dreams, she would see her and her husband being physically forced into some type of craft. Before long, two writers heard about the Hills story and contacted them. The Hills, with the aid of the writers, compiled the time chart of the events of September 19th. There could be no doubt that the couple had lost about 2 hours of time somewhere along the way. The missing time element and the desire to know what had happened during that time prompted them to contact a psychiatrist. They decided on a Boston psychiatrist and neurologist, Dr. Benjamin Simon. His suggestion for treatment was regressive hypnosis, which would hopefully unlock the memories of the 2 missing hours of time. Simon hypnotized Barney first. According to Barney's description, the beings aboard the craft were not much taller than 5 feet, had a gray complexion, and large bulb-like heads with large eyes, and not much in the way of a nose save for a couple nostrils. Due to his fear, he kept his eyes closed for much of the abduction and physical examination. Based on these early responses, Simon told Barney that he would not be allowed to remember the hypnosis sessions unless he was certain he could remember them without being further traumatized. Under hypnosis, as was consistent with his conscious recall, Barney reported that the binocular strap had broken when he ran from the UFO back to his car. He recalled driving the car away from the UFO, but that afterward he felt irresistibly compelled to pull off the road and drive into the woods. He eventually sighted 6 beings standing in the dirt road. The car stalled, and 3 of the men approached the car to assist the couple out. They told Barney not to fear them. He was still anxious, however, and he reported that the leader told Barney to close his eyes. When asked how he knew one of them was the leader, Barney responded that all the other men seemed to surround, follow, and converse primarily with one that was slightly taller than the rest. Barney related that he and Betty were taken onto the disc-shaped craft where they were separated. He was escorted to a room by 3 of the men and told to lie on a small rectangular exam table. The being scraped his skin, collected a sperm sample, and peered into his ears and mouth. Someone felt his spine and seemed to be counting his vertebrae. While Betty reported extended conversations with the beings in English, Barney said that he heard them speaking in a mumbling language he did not understand. Betty also mentioned this detail. Barney was not familiar with the term telepathy, but his account of events describes their communications in English as being some type of thought transference. Both Betty and Barney stated that they hadn't observed the being's mouth moving when they communicated in English. Barney recalled being escorted from the ship and taken to his car, which was now near the road rather than in the woods. In a daze, he watched the ship leave. At this point, both Hills remember hearing strange beeping sounds and felt a vibration coming from their trunk. Betty's experience also caused considerable emotional distress during her capture and examination. Dr. Simon ended one session early because tears were flowing down her cheeks and she was in considerable agony. Betty's account was consistent with that of her husband, but with a few added details. At one point, Betty recounts the strange beings trying to separate her from her husband. She asks if they could stay together, but they tell her that the procedure would be much shorter if the two stayed apart. Betty is also examined in a similar fashion to her husband, with a few added details. Fluid was extracted from her abdomen as part of what was described to her as a pregnancy test. There was a rather large needle involved, which was going to be pushed into Betty Hill's abdomen. The beings claimed to be testing her nervous system. Betty was afraid the needle would be painful, but the beings assured her it would not. Not surprisingly, the needle was indeed quite sharp, but after it was removed, one of the beings waved his hand over the spot and the pain immediately went away. After the procedure, Betty was allowed to ask any questions she liked. She wanted to know more about where the visitors came from. To her surprise, the beings were able to pull up something that looked like a hologram map. One being pointed where they came from and mentioned where they were headed. After their discussion, the beings began talking amongst themselves in their strange tongue. They told Betty that they have decided to not let her remember her experience. The last thing Betty recalls before being escorted from the ship is telling them that there is no way she could possibly forget what had happened, and that she would find a way to remember. Dr. Simon gave Betty the post-hypnotic suggestion that she could sketch a copy of the star map. She hesitated, thinking she would be unable to accurately depict the three-dimensional quality of the map. Eventually, however, she did what Simon suggested. Although she said the map had many stars, she drew only those that stood out in her memory. Her map consisted of 12 prominent stars connected by lines, and 3 lesser ones that formed a distinctive triangle. She said she was told the stars connected by solid lines formed trade routes, whereas dashed lines were less traveled stars. While skeptics have claimed that any combination of dots could recreate part of the cosmos, statisticians have looked at the possibility and are certain that the probability of randomly plotting the exact locations of neighboring stars is near impossible, roughly 1 in 70,000. While the encounter this couple had with foreign life forms is indeed strange, one must consider the nature of their reaction. Both Hills experienced an immense amount of fear, but was it all really justified? At one point, Barney was so afraid that all he wanted to do was get his gun. After the encounter was over, he reacted in a much calmer fashion. Upon returning to his car, he and his wife were both smiling. He even went as far as saying that the encounter wasn't so bad and that he had no real reason to be afraid. How would any of us have reacted to such a situation? While the beings may be foreign to us, they certainly displayed some signs of compassion with their constant assurance, willingness to discuss information, and mysterious healing abilities. Could it have been the case that the real monsters aboard that craft were really us?